Welcome to Ransomware, Understanding the Threat and Mitigating Risks. My name is Kevin Chew, and I'm Principal Threat Engineer on the Security Incident Response Team here at Ingram Micro. Today I have with me my colleague Steve Hobbs.
Thanks, Kevin. My name is Steve Hobbs, and I am the Deputy Cyber Incident Commander within Ingram Micro's Incident Command Group.
Our agenda for today is to provide a high-level introduction to ransomware, then move into some techniques ransomware uses to attack a computer or network. We will not get into the details of code, as each variant is different, but we will try to help you better understand what is going on inside a computer that's been compromised. We will discuss the similarities and differences of how ransomware affects a company compared to you as an individual. Our goal is to provide a basic understanding of how ransomware attacks work, as well as provide information that will provide you the ability to recognize and fight against these attacks both at work and at home.
When we say ransomware, many people have heard that term or have a basic understanding of what it is. To start things off, we will provide our definition of ransomware, how it can affect companies, as well as how it can affect you individually. We will then discuss some things that can be done to help prevent ransomware.
What is ransomware? By itself, ransomware is nothing more than code. Unfortunately, it is malicious code, and once executed, it will infect your computer and restrict access to your files or your operating system. As we will see later, restriction is often accomplished with encryption. Once access is restricted, a payment is demanded, usually in the form of a ransom note displayed on the screen. This note will explain how once the ransom is paid, the victim can regain access to their files. It has become more common for attackers to not only threaten destruction of files, but if payment is not met, but they will also threaten to release sensitive data to the public on either a wall of shame or to a public forum. The bottom line is, ransomware is usually about the attacker making money by holding your data ransom.
Companies and individuals share many of the same adverse effects of a ransomware attack, but the scope and scale are usually different. Data loss is a potential for both if the decision is made to not pay the ransom. Several factors play into this scenario, but we will cover those later. For now, let's say there are no backups available or the backup solution was compromised. Additionally, no decryption key is available, even if a payment was sent. This would be a prime example of data loss. For a company, this could mean intellectual property, customer or financial data, or employee records. For an individual, this could mean the loss of financial records, sentimental data such as photos or videos, medical records, etc.
Financial loss is always a factor with ransomware. Although paying the ransom is never recommended since it would be considered funding the attacker, often there is no other option to get the data back. Paying the ransom might result in regaining access to the data, but numerous cases have been reported where the attacker never provided the decryption key or the key was not or did not work. This could be the case for both company and individual. Another component of financial loss is recovery costs. Companies lose money every minute a production server is down, compounded with the potential costs of needing a third-party company to decrypt the data for recovery would significantly increase the financial impact on a company. As for an individual, the impact could be the same, but costs are usually not as high since the amount of data is usually much smaller for individuals. It is still a financial burden that until recently, individuals didn't have the option of acquiring cyber insurance to cover losses. Some insurance providers are now offering it, but you would have to check and verify ransomware coverage is available through your provider.
Data and financial losses affect both companies and individuals. However, these last two items apply more to individuals. When a system is compromised, the attacker has access to all of the data on that system. This unauthorized access can lead to data exposure, especially if the attacker decides to publicly post the content. This scare tactic is just another method used by attackers to get payment, where they will threaten to release the information they acquired in the compromise. Unfortunately, the data is often sold on the dark web, which can lead to identity theft.
Ransomware can have a huge emotional toll to a victim. Having to deal with the loss of sentimental data, money, and identity is extremely stressful. The process of identifying what happened, in addition to the recovery process, takes time, and regaining control might cause increased frustration and anxiety. The topic of identity theft is outside the scope of this conversation, but just know There are companies and government agencies out there to assist. So, Steve, I know we'll be reiterating what we just talked about, but let's get into why prevention is so important. For a company, data drives business. Without the data, a company could be forced to shut down, leaving employees without a job or clients without previously provided services. It all happens too often, especially with smaller companies, where an attack forces the company to close its doors. Why is it important for individuals to protect data?
Think of all your family photos stored on your computer, schoolwork, contact information, medical records, legal or tax documents are just a few examples. Nowadays, we store everything on our computers and don't really think about it because it's always there. Now imagine it's all gone in an instant. Family vacation pictures or videos of your child's first steps, items that are irreplaceable. Sure, you can get copies of legal, medical, tax documents, but now your private data is in the hands of an attacker and could cause more damage, like identity theft. Preventative measures can help reduce the risk of losing this valuable information.
As mentioned, financial losses are a given for both, whether ransoms are paid or third party companies are hired to attempt to decrypt. When it comes to ransom demands, the amounts are usually much greater for companies, as the attackers know their target and gauge the demand off what they perceive the data is worth. Companies can also incur additional costs due to downtimes and legal or regulatory damages.
As previously mentioned, when servers are down in a company, there is usually an associated financial loss. Reducing downtime is imperative for companies. For individuals, it is probably more of an inconvenience if their computer is down.
Ransomware could bring negative press for a company, which could lead to a decline in business. When an attack occurs where data is lost, people could lose trust in the targeted company and might look elsewhere to do business.
Brand damage usually doesn't apply to individuals when it comes to ransomware. Individuals are affected on a more personal level.
Let's get into a little more detail about ransomware, how they work, the different types, and some real world examples. But first, let's briefly talk about the history of ransomware. The first documented attack occurred in 1989 and was named PC Cyborg. This was a malicious program that was distributed on floppy disks. After the user ran the program, the number of times that computer rebooted was tracked, and after a certain number of reboots, the program started encrypting the victim's files. A ransom note was then printed out on the victim's printer demanding $189 to be sent to a P.O. box in Panama. Thankfully, the encryption that was used was easily cracked and decryption tools were made readily available to those affected.
After that first documented case, there was a lull until the early 2000s where stronger encryption was implemented and the internet was more common within households. Everyone had at least one email address, if not multiple addresses, which paved the way for email to become the distribution method of choice. Ransomware has become a big business, and internet search will provide all sorts of profits made by attacker groups ranging from the thousands of dollars to tens of millions of dollars. Unfortunately, the greater cost is the disruption and destruction to companies. This amount is in the billions each year and is projected to increase exponentially.
The most common type of ransomware that we hear about is the type that encrypts your data, making it inaccessible until a ransom is paid. We will show some examples of this in the upcoming slides.
Another form is when the ransomware locks the user out of the whole computer. Though this sometimes happens with encryption, locker ransomware does not use encryption.
Scareware is more of an annoyance than anything else. It will alert the individual about non existent infections on their computer and demand a payment to remove them.
Mobile ransomware are all categorized together. These can use encryption, locking mechanisms, etc. But the focus here is the target is on a mobile device.
Doxware attacks often hit the news as they can lead to data privacy violations. In a Doxware attack, files are encrypted and exfiltrated by the attacker. The attacker will not only demand the ransom to be paid, but will also threaten to release any captured sensitive data to the public if a ransom is not paid. This common form of extortion has become more popular in recent years.
This final type can consist of any of the previous types. Ransomware as a service is where cybercriminals no longer have to write or maintain the malicious code. They can buy or rent it and utilize an existing infrastructure to launch their attacks. Some of these services are full featured and even have a support staff to assist with the configuration of the attack.
Steve, let's briefly discuss a few of the more well known attacks from the past. Many of these attacks were publicized on news outlets as they affected large organizations. WannaCry, for example, is estimated to have hit over 200,000 computers when it was at its peak. A hacker group known as the Shadow Brokers released exploit code they had obtained which specifically targeted Microsoft Windows computers. This exploit was known as Eternal Blue. The vulnerability it attacked was identified and fixed in a patch months before WannaCry made news, which brought to light a glaring gap in patching. Even though a patch was previously released, many did not install it in a timely manner, which left hundreds of thousands of computers vulnerable. WannaCry is still considered active, but would require an unpatched targeted computer to be successful at infection. Even if files were encrypted, the decryption key was identified and tools have been made publicly available. During its run, it is believed the attacker made close to $300,000 from paid ransoms, but caused over $4 billion in damages. It did not target specific individuals or organizations. It scanned and attacked vulnerable Windows systems. Given its ability to self propagate, after it executed, there was not a need for a delivery mechanism like email.
Another popular attack that took advantage of Eternal Blue was NotPetya. However, the extent that it used Eternal Blue to spread is debated because of its use of Mimikatz, a credential stealing software. The credentials harvested from Mimikatz could then be used to compromise other systems. It is believed that there was political motivation behind the creation of this attack. Unfortunately, it expanded and affected systems outside of the assumed target. This is thought to be one of the most destructive attacks documented because it is believed there was no intent to decrypt the files. It was built only to encrypt. NotPetya has been estimated to have caused over $10 billion in damages. It affected many different industries, including banking, supply chain, logistics, and pharmaceutical companies.
CryptoLocker was another ransomware that specifically targeted Microsoft Windows computers. There were two main delivery methods with CryptoLocker: phishing emails and the Game Over Zeus botnet. Upon execution of the malicious file, it would search for specific file types to encrypt. The encryption targeted Microsoft Office documents, photos, and AutoCAD files. Over 250,000 computers were compromised, and an estimated over $3 million were gained in ransom payouts prior to the authorities taking down the botnet and preventing future attacks.
Locky was another attack that initiated from a phishing email. The email contained an attachment that, when opened, would execute the malicious code. An interesting point with Locky was its constant adaptation to detections. The attackers were continually modifying the email campaigns, file naming conventions, and source code to circumvent detection. Over 400,000 machines were infected by Locky. Several industries were affected, such as manufacturing, telecommunications, and transportation. However, the healthcare industry was the main target and hardest hit. One U.S. hospital reported paying the $17,000 ransom just to quickly remediate the attack. Even though industries were specifically targeted, individuals were also affected. Access to medical records, ability to use computers and medical equipment, delayed appointments, and canceled surgeries were just a few of the adverse effects of the attacks. Lockheed was very successful during its time, but the original is no longer in commission. However, many variants have been released.
Nowadays, it seems that we are mostly hear about attacks that target companies and steal their data. These attacks are being performed by ransomware groups, families, or gangs. The groups manage the ransomware and provide it as a service, hence the name Ransomware as a Service. This is a brief list of some of the more well known ransomware groups of the past. Most of these groups are no longer active due to the work of law enforcement agencies. However, as the authorities shut down one group, it seems like two new groups pop up overnight. Lockbit, Clop, and Black Cat are all still active groups, each having attacks tied to them as recent as August 2023.
As previously discussed, ransomware as a service offers the ransomware payload, the infrastructure, and support as part of the package service. The services can be purchased or rented by attackers to deploy for financial gain or destruction. Attackers no longer need to worry about writing code or updating it when virus definitions detect their code. That is all taken care of with the service. It seems more common these days for attackers to have a multi-pronged approach, as discussed earlier in Doxware, where extortion plays into their attempt to get payment. Sensitive data will be stolen and threaten to be released if the payment has not been made by a certain date. This technique is used on both individuals and companies. So, Kevin, let's discuss how all of this works and walk through the steps of a ransomware attack.
Sure, Steve. I'm going to break this down to the simplest form since each attack has different characteristics. As we will see in upcoming slides, initial delivery can come in many forms. For this example, we will use an email that is either a malicious attachment or a link to a malicious site. If the user opens a file or clicks the link, the malicious code will run on the computer causing the infection. In many of the newer attacks, a copy of the data is made and exfiltrated to the attacker's infrastructure. Once this process completes, the files on the victim's computer are encrypted in the background. The ransom note will then be displayed after the files have been encrypted. This note is usually accompanied by a timer letting the victim know how much time they have before the price goes up, data is published, or the decryption key is destroyed and they no longer have the ability to recover.
Remember, it is not recommended to pay the ransom, but if it is determined that a payment will be made, this is usually done through Bitcoin. As we saw in the earlier examples, a payment address will be provided where the Bitcoin can be deposited. In theory, once payment is received, a decryption key would be provided to allow the victim to decrypt their files. However, throughout the history of ransomware, documented cases rarely show a 100% success rate or that a key was even provided after payment. Just because a payment is made does not guarantee that you will be able to recover your files. Now that we've provided a little more detail, let's get into how an attacker takes advantage of a computer system.
Well, we've already touched a little on this topic, but we'll go into it a little deeper. We will focus on four main areas that attackers exploit in their attacks: outdated software, missing patches or updates, poor security practices, and social engineering. Developers do not reinvent the wheel when they write code, so they often use pre existing code or modules wherever they can. These external modules are not maintained by the internal development teams and can be considered third party software. Over time, these third party components are updated or might reach their end of life. End of life occurs when a particular version is not going to be updated or supported anymore. When this happens, it is up to the developer to update their code or find another solution. If a new version of software is found and installed, do you go back and make sure you've removed the old, outdated software? With upgrades, it is often assumed that the new software removes the old. However, this is not always the case, especially in software modules, as some code might not be backward compatible, so both new and old are left on the computer. Attackers can take advantage of these old, out of date software components that remain on computers as they often contain vulnerabilities or exploitable code. The same holds true for legacy software. Companies sometimes make the decision to just keep the old software because it is cheaper and there's no need to spend money on something new when what they have still works. Legacy software is a high risk as it is often a target to be exploited due to the outdated software.
Missing updates piggyback on outdated software when there are updates or software patches, but the user hasn't deployed them. Several reasons can factor into this. First, if the software is not managed by the company or the individual, or if the automatic updates are not turned on or available, the software can quickly fall behind in patches. If the updates are not monitored or not checked every so often, failures may be preventing new installs. And finally, out of band and 0 day vulnerabilities are some of the hardest to keep up with because they are not deployed at routine intervals. So it takes extra effort to keep on top of these. 0 day vulnerability exploits are highly sought after by attackers because there is no patch or update available. Attackers will take advantage of these vulnerabilities whenever they get the chance.
Attackers will take advantage of any opportunity you give them. Poor security practices are fairly easy to fix, but if they're not fixed, they could cost you greatly. Some of these points are repetitive, but that is just to stress their importance. These are all areas an attacker can take advantage of if not implemented. If there is an identified flaw that they can exploit, they will. systems should be patched. Multi-factor authentication and complex passwords should be used wherever possible. Attackers continually attempt to compromise accounts. If they only have to provide a password, their goal is exponentially easier. Awareness training keeps you up to date on security happenings. Unaware users can lead to an easy compromise. Not having an email filter solution in place will increase the chances of being compromised. This is more of just playing the numbers. No solution is 100% effective, but a filtering solution will drastically reduce the amount of phishing campaigns in your inbox, limiting the possibility of compromise.
Not having scheduled backups benefits the attacker as you are more likely to pay the ransom if you do not have a way to recover your data. Additionally, backups can limit your potential downtime. Firewall rules should restrict access to known malicious sites and limit inbound connections to only those that are required. Outdated antivirus signatures will not detect new threats. Ransomware groups are continually updating their code to deter detection. If signatures are not being updated, you are falling behind the attackers. And lastly, running everything in an elevated account like an administrator account increases your risk and maximizes the potential damage of a compromise.
There are many different types of social engineering techniques used in ransomware attacks, the most common being phishing emails. There is always a sense of urgency with these emails. The attacker's goal is to gain information or access to the victim's system. We have all seen these where the sender is requesting you to click on a link or open an urgent attachment. The attachment will either contain the malicious program or it would download it and install it in the background.
Smishing is another technique used where an attacker sends an SMS text to your phone. As Kevin mentioned with phishing, there is usually a sense of urgency or importance that you take immediate action. It's the same story where they are attempting to gain sensitive information from the victim by tricking them into installing malware onto their phone or luring them to a fraudulent website that would request personal information.
Vishing is the same concept as phishing and smishing, but it is carried out via phone. These types of attacks can initiate with a phone call or could start where the end user clicked a link or got redirected to a website where it claims they were compromised and need to call this number in order to speak with a trained technician. With ransomware, either scenario could occur, but the end goal is to gain credentials or have the user install the malicious program.
The final social engineering technique we will discuss is pretexting. Pretexting can utilize any number of social engineering techniques, including those previously discussed. Pretexting is where the attacker makes up a feasible story to gain the victim's trust. The attacker will then attempt to coerce the victim to provide their sensitive information, such as a user account and password, or have them install fraudulent software that would initiate the ransomware. So you might be asking, what are some things we can do to prevent ransomware?
That's a good question, Steve. In this next section, we will identify some of the high level items that organizations should be handling, but we will mainly focus on what individuals can be doing to prevent ransomware attacks on their home computers. Companies should be providing security awareness training. These trainings should discuss the latest tactics and how individuals can quickly identify suspicious activity. Additionally, companies should routinely perform phishing tests to ensure their end users can identify strange or out of the ordinary emails. And finally, educating the employee on how to prevent ransomware attacks should be done at least annually.
On a similar note, individuals should stay up to date on current happenings. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, has a ton of valuable information for both corporations and individuals. Their website is cisa.gov/stop ransomware. Antivirus vendor sites provide a wealth of information on new variants as well as ransomware groups and their targets. Quite often, examples of current or recent email phishing campaigns can be found on their website or social media accounts. And finally, major news outlets have increased their coverage of cybersecurity events and usually report when major attacks are publicized. Take note of these and stay aware in your internet activities.
Companies maintain patching schedules that not only include their operating systems, but also the approved applications that are managed by their information technology teams. This should be inclusive of third-party software packages and components used by the development teams. Operating system upgrades are most likely handled through a similar process like patching and software updates.
For individuals, it is easier to manage updates and patches if you have set up the software to automatically update itself. As we see here, users can have Windows automatically download and install patches when they become available. To get to this dialog, a user would click the Windows button and type Windows settings. Then they would select Update and Security or Windows Update based on the version of Windows they are running. Once they click Windows Update, they will have the option to check for regular updates or configure how updates are downloaded and installed in the advanced options. For Macs, choose the Apple menu, System Settings, which will bring you to this screen. Click on General and make sure automatic updates are set to on. As for applications, it is best to set up auto updates as well wherever possible. In O365, click on the File menu option and select Account, which will allow you to check for updates and install them. Most applications will have update options under the Settings menu as displayed here for Google Chrome. It is important to become familiar with the software you use on your computer and make sure it is kept up to date.
Companies cover the implementation of robust security solutions and practices. This high-level list, which by no means is complete, is being used here for comparison for what individuals should be doing. In addition to the items listed, companies often implement a security information and event management solution known as SIEM. SIEM solutions will ingest logs from most of the items on this list, allowing for security teams to monitor for any anomalous activity across their enterprise. The goal here is to identify early signs and stop potential attacks or minimize the capability of an attacker. Nothing is going to be 100%, but if a company can layer these defenses, it becomes a deterrent or at least makes them a more difficult target. Steve, what can individuals do to implement robust solutions?
Well, most antivirus companies incorporate many of these solutions into their products. This takes the guesswork and technical know-how out of the configuration for end users, making for an easier implementation. Many provide web and email filtering, as well as firewall and IDS bundled into their solution. Antivirus is becoming better with behavioral analysis and advanced heuristics, so they're not just relying on signature detections. Users should make sure they set up multi-factor authentication with any online account they have, wherever possible. It might seem like you're overdoing it, but many users will reuse passwords for all their accounts. If one system becomes compromised, then all your accounts could be at risk. A good way to keep track of account passwords is to utilize a password vault. There are several good options out there, even a few good free options, but which one to use is going to be different for everyone. It's best to do a little research and see what meets your needs. Users should also consider segmenting their home networks. Forcing guests to use a guest Wi-Fi can help prevent an unknown system from attacking your network. Backup and recovery is an important component in your security solution as well, but we will discuss that in more detail later. And finally, standard user accounts should be used on a regular basis for daily activity. This account should be limited to access only what is needed. This is true for both corporations and individuals. Administrators have full access to run anything on a computer, and it should only be used when necessary.
Steve, I would like to add Windows 10 and Windows 11 both have built in virus and threat protection as well as ransomware protection that can be a viable option for individuals as an added deterrent to attackers. Configuring these settings is out of the scope of this discussion, but these are pretty straightforward to configure if one chooses to do so. You can configure these under the Windows security settings. You can get to the Windows security settings by clicking on the Windows button and typing Windows Security. Once that dialog box appears, both protections can be configured under the Virus and Threat Protection section.
Many ransomware attacks start with a phishing email, so best practices are very important. Organizations usually implement robust email filtering solutions, but individuals and company employees should still follow simple best practices. It really boils down to asking questions. Is the email coming from a trusted sender? Are you sure the individual sending the email is who they say they are? Are they asking you to take actions on something or asking something out of the ordinary? Are you expecting the email and or attachment? Does something not seem right with the timing or content of the email? When in doubt, verify. Call the sender and verify they are indeed the sender.
Companies should have gold images for their servers and workstations to allow for quick rebuilds if necessary. Regularly scheduled backups, including all data volumes, are a must. Additionally, backups of any configuration files and or license files would be beneficial to minimize the time it takes to get back to normal. The backups should be stored off-site in a different location than the source. How about for individuals, Steve?
For individuals, it is mostly the same. If possible, full system backups are still the best option. Utilizing external or cloud storage for your backup is fine, but it is imperative that once the backup is completed, the user disconnects from the solution. Log out of the cloud service or manually disconnect the external drive. Keeping the backup offline, unless you are actively performing a backup, will take care of your offline storage requirements.
As with the previous sections, companies should be handling these next topics, but we will cover them from a high level and discuss what an individual can do to better their personal security posture.
This is the NIST, or National Institute of Standards and Technology, Incident Response Lifecycle. Having a detailed incident response plan is key for when you are attacked to aid in the recovery and remediation. For more information about an incident response plan, be sure to check out Corey Mock's presentation called Incident Command: Fighting Back When We Are Attacked. Today, we will focus on some of the decision points that need to be made during an attack for both corporations and individuals. So, Kevin, what would the first steps be?
The first step in ransomware response is to stop the spread. Companies want to minimize the number of affected machines and isolate those as quickly as possible to stop propagation. This is going to hopefully limit downtime and reduce financial loss to the company. Unfortunately, due to the speed of how fast these attacks occur, by the time security is alerted on the issue, files have already been encrypted and security teams are now fighting against the clock to recover. Security teams will want to gather as much information as possible from the affected machines to see if they can identify any indicators that could be used to recognize early signs of detection. Forensic artifacts might identify some of these signs.
Individuals will follow the same process, minus the forensics artifacts, as that capability is not feasible for most. If there are several machines or storage devices connected to the home network, the quicker you identify malicious activity, the greater the chance of limiting the damage. Unplug devices from your network or disconnect from your Wi Fi until you can investigate and determine the cause and extent of the infection.
Identification is mostly a focus for companies, as individuals usually are not specifically targeted. Rather, they are part of a mass distribution or are targeted from the vulnerable software they are running. Attribution with ransomware is usually pretty easy, as ransomware groups are quick to take responsibility for their accomplishments. Sometimes their information will even be in the ransom note. Determining the scope of ransomware involves identifying how many computers or devices have been compromised. And indicators of compromise are the characteristics or behaviors that indicate a computer or device has been infected. A few common indicators are the types of files or folders being targeted for encryption, details of the ransom note, network communication with suspicious IP addresses or domains, and details of the email if that was the delivery method. These details can consist of sender information, subject, and attachments or links. Indicators of compromise can help identify the attack and can also assist in determining whether a decryption key is already available.
It is never recommended to pay the ransom because that would be funding the attacker. However, if a decryption key doesn't already exist, or if you do not have proper backups, paying might be the option you choose. Some questions or considerations that should be taken in your decision are: do you have a clean backup of the affected files? Are the files irreplaceable? Does the cost justify the means? Are you willing to risk paying with no guarantee you will even get your files back? It is not uncommon for the attackers to not send the decryption key, or the key just simply doesn't work. Also, there could be legal implications if ransoms are paid, just depending on your local laws.
Just having backups does not automatically mean you can fully recover from a ransomware attack. First, you need to verify the integrity of the backup and make sure your last known good backup was prior to the infection. If a prior backup is not available, it might be required to rebuild from scratch. If the backup is available and has been validated, then it is fine to move forward with restoring. After the restoration, make sure any missing security patches are installed, and if known, the point of attack is no longer open. Finally, you should scan for vulnerabilities prior to returning back to normal use.
Another decision that needs to be made is whether you should involve the authorities. Each company will have their own procedure to follow, which will most likely involve the information security and legal teams. For individuals, there are options to work with the authorities as well. CISA not only provides a wealth of information on ransomware, they also provide the means to report attacks. Their site has a form to report your incident to them, as well as a link on the site to report directly to the FBI. CISA also provides links to local contact information for FBI and Secret Service field offices. The authorities track attackers and have been known to bring down attacker infrastructure, stopping groups from future attacks. They can also assist with any questions with regard to legal or regulatory obligations. Determining if you need outside help might come down to the scope of the attack, how many machines were involved, how much financial loss, or if other companies in the same industry were targeted, might all be questions helping make this decision. The authorities can often assist or provide guidance when an organization needs it.
Companies will go through a lessons learned session for incidents to help them improve on their response. Documentation should be reviewed and updated to reflect any necessary changes. What about individuals, Steve?
Individuals won't have documented procedures to review for personal attacks, but they can review the steps they perform prior to and during the attack to determine if they should change the way they maintain their computer or their network. This might include modifications to how they handle backups or routine patching.
Good point, Steve. Companies address some of these in their security controls review. They should look to address what gaps allowed for the attack to be successful, and if it was a misconfiguration or just a limitation with the products they are using. A different product or service offering might fill this gap.
Individuals might review their email filtering or their antivirus product to fill a potential gap. Additionally, they might look into other offerings like a backup service or a password vault if these were not previously used.
Identifying what in the response plan worked and didn't work is an important piece of the lessons learned. It helps identify where focus needs to be to remediate the shortcomings of the past and be preventative in the future. This holds true for both corporations and individuals. Everyone should have a plan of some sort to prepare for a ransomware attack, if nothing else, to protect your data and hopefully save money.
And lastly, both companies and individuals should always work on improving procedures. Even though this applies more to a company, individuals should continue to improve their personal security posture. Whether this is getting better at routine backups or making sure all your software is up to date, there are always areas we can work on to improve security.
Today, we've discussed what ransomware is and the different types you might encounter. We walked through how it works from the initial target and infection to the end goal, whether that is profit or destruction. We went over some measures that should be taken at home as well as in the office, and we touched on incident response and recovery strategies. Steve, anything else we forgot to mention?
Don't forget the importance of proactive prevention. Preventative measures can help limit financial and data loss, as well as loss of business relationships. No plan is perfect, but if we continually stay on top of new trends and techniques being used by attackers, we better position ourselves to identify and react to the continual threats.
That's right, Steve. Attackers are always improving their tactics, and we as end users need to try and stay one step ahead of them. They will continue to develop new delivery mechanisms or better detection avoidance methods, so we need to expect this and always be alert and aware. Don't relax on low hanging fruit. Make sure your operating system and software are always up to date. flaws are continually being identified and patches released shortly after. Try to deploy these patches as soon as possible to reduce the risk of compromise. Keep up with security news. Corporations will cover this in their security awareness training, but as an individual, keep up to date on the latest attacks and what to look out for.
And lastly, stay vigilant. We have mentioned it a few times. When in doubt, ask questions. Question abnormal activity, especially emails, texts, or phone calls. If you receive an unexpected email from your friend requesting personal information, call and verify they sent it. Verifying with a phone call or text can go a long way in staying safe. Always be on the lookout for abnormal activity, and when identified, report it. Organizations typically have their own method to report incidents, but individuals can report activity through portals like CISA, FBI, or their local law enforcement agencies.
It has been a pleasure spending a little time with you today discussing a topic we're passionate about. We hope you can take away a little bit of information that can help you identify and stay safe from future attacks. Thank you.